Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project designed entirely to let me spend more time with interesting people than I would ever get on the radio. And, today's guest certainly fits into that category. Leo Varadkar, welcome.
Thank you.
Doctor, politician, youngest ever Taoiseach in Ireland, and now memoirist.
Yes, writer, yeah.
Writer, and to add to the list. It's weird for British journalists. I don't know how you find it talking to us, because we don't have the depth of knowledge of Irish politics that perhaps we should have. And yet we always found ourselves casting our eyes across the sea at moments of crisis. How do you feel when you come in this direction?
Yeah, I think sometimes Irish people are bothered by the fact that we know so much about you and you don't know so much about us. It is, of course, entirely logical. 60 million people in the United Kingdom, 5.5 in Ireland. It's like the Canada-America thing. So we watch your TV, we often read your papers, listen to your radio stations, and it doesn't happen in the other direction. But I suppose it does breed certainly a certain amount of familiarity for me. When I come to Britain, I don't really feel that I'm coming to a foreign country. I don't even technically need a passport. And of course, like every Irish person, I have loads of friends and family here. And indeed, my parents actually met in England. Were it not for the British Empire and the NHS, they would never have met. And would probably not have been able to speak English to each other.
Crikey.
In Leicester, yeah.
During the Brexit negotiations, which was where you kind of excelled yourself, according to most analyses, how significant was British political ignorance of Ireland during those talks? From politicians, not from commentators.
Well, it was, to be honest, it was politicians, media, and also at official civil service level as well.
Really?
That was by no means universal.
Sure. But some people.
Yeah, well, some and a lot didn't have much of an understanding of Ireland or Northern Ireland, and I think that was very apparent by the fact that the impact on Ireland and Northern Ireland in particular never really featured at all in the referendum debates.
What were you thinking watching that
There were one or two exceptions. Theresa May, who largely sat the campaign out, made a speech in Belfast.
Early doors, and then stayed silent. Really.
But that turned out to be quite prophetic in terms of the impact that it could have on Northern Ireland and the delicate piece there.
Was it frustrating? Not so much when you sat down to do the negotiations, but knowing what extraordinary impact this would have on the island of Ireland, and also knowing that none of the people engaged in the debate on either side really seemed to either appreciate it or care.
It was a bit. Ultimately, the decision to leave the European Union was a decision made by the British people for Britain, and that was just the stark reality of it. And the impact on Ireland wasn't the only thing that wasn't really thought through, unfortunately. Even the extent to which what it would really mean to be outside the single market. And there were people advocating Brexit who were promising that trade would remain seamless and that Britain could stay in the single market. So it was a little bit frustrating in that sense. But I know my history, and it's not necessarily something that's particularly new.
That blasé approach to the island.
Well, just a lack of awareness of Ireland and its politics, even where the border is.
Yes.
I remember an interesting kind of vox pop, and you have to be careful of vox pops because they can be taken out of context and twisted. But just asking people in Britain to point out where the border is, and as you know, as somebody who visits Ireland, the most northerly tip of Ireland is not in Northern Ireland.
Yeah. I remember a call from a fellow who'd had a bit of building work done since the Good Friday Agreement had been signed, and it meant that his bathroom was in the south and the rest of his house was still in the north. And you sort of thought, how exactly are you going to reintroduce regulatory checks?
It goes through villages, through farms, through houses. It's an artificial border. It's not even the provincial border of Ulster. It's an artificial border that was drawn in 1921 when people believed it would be temporary and would be changed by a boundary commission, and that didn't happen.
We mentioned Leicester. That's where your parents met, but it's not where you were born. Your mother had made her way there from County Waterford, and your dad, Ashok, had made his way there from India.
Yes, yeah.
So, I mean, you have migration and diversity built into not just your DNA, but also your family tree.
Yeah, that's true. So he's a doctor, she's a nurse. They
Miriam.
both migrated to England in the 70s. Met in Leicester, got married in Maidenhead in the Catholic parish church in Theresa May's constituency, which we chatted about once or twice. Lived here for a long time. My sister was born in England, is still here, in fact. Well, although she came back to Ireland in the meantime, obviously. They tried living in India for about 6 months, didn't really work out. They have differing accounts as to why that was. And then came to live in Ireland, and they'd moved back to Ireland many years before I was born. But like a lot of things, your background does form your politics. And it's something I hadn't really thought about very much until I met with President Obama. This was during Trump's first term. Obama was no longer president at that stage, and he grew up in Kansas in a very white state, raised by white grandparents. And he kind of said to me that you and I have to believe some of the things we believe about the world and about politics by virtue of our birth. We were the two tall, dark kids with funny names.
Gosh.
And I never thought about that until he said it. And of course, my heritage and my upbringing must have made me more globally focused, outward looking. Always knew that there was a world way beyond Ireland, and part of the reasons as to why I believe in things like multilateralism, why I eschew nationalism, must in some ways be linked to my heritage, because if you take those philosophies to an extreme, somebody like me shouldn't exist.
Gosh, yes. Or Obama.
Interracial marriages were, I don't think they were ever illegal in Ireland or the UK. They probably just weren't contemplated, but they certainly were in places like the United States.
Well, even in 1971, it must have been head-turning for your parents to be together in public, certainly to get married. It would be a very rare experience.
Yeah, even more so in Ireland than here.
Yes.
And my mum had to get special permission from the Catholic Church. In theory, from the Pope, but I doubt the Pope was dealing with these things himself.
You never know. Print the legend.
I'm sure it was from a bishop secretary somewhere or something, and that was the era of what they called ne temere. So part of the agreement was that my mum could marry my dad, who's Hindu, but the kids would have to be brought up Catholic, and indeed we were.
You needed papal dispensation just to marry someone from outside the faith?
You did at that time, yeah.
Good Lord, because I know until quite recently it would be tricky for divorced people to marry in a Catholic church, but I didn't know that. My parents, I think my mum must have just passed herself off as a Catholic. When I got adopted, they got an awful lot of trouble from some of the nuns who just wouldn't contemplate giving a baby to
a non-Catholic family.
My dad was obviously Catholic, but my mum wasn't. Was it a great romance? Did they talk to you? Did they talk to you about it much? I mean, because it must have been a big love match, mustn't it? Their eyes met across an operating table, or
yeah, I guess so. They haven't told us all that much about it, and there's a big enough age gap between them. I think it's about 8 years,
right?
Which I think is big when you're young.
Yeah.
As you get older, it's 8 years isn't so much.
But I mean the idea of going the distance, that actually getting married as opposed to just courting, must have had ramifications that are quite hard to contemplate in 2025.
Yeah, like they must have been very brave in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because at that time the world was different.
Yes.
So it must have been a very, very brave thing. And of course, my parents or my grandparents in Ireland were very accepting of it as well.
Were they?
Yeah.
And then you're in Ireland. So you're born in 1979. Your dad is established by then as a doctor in Ireland. Did your mum work when you were young, or did she knock it on the head when she was raising you and your sisters?
The first couple of years, she was a stay-at-home mum, so like that was great in a lot of ways. I still have vague memories of hanging out with my mum when I was 3 or 4, and collecting the child benefit and going for lunch and being walked to my preschool. But when my dad became a GP, he set up practice, and the GP system in Ireland is very similar to Britain. They're, sort of self-employed people, run their own practices, generally own their own practices. She then became the practice nurse, accountant, manager, receptionist, and really everything. So, they spent an awful lot of time together if you think about it, because the surgery was initially in the house, and then later we moved to a bigger house, and it was in the extension to that house. So there was never really a clear definition between work and home.
No. And you don't know. I mean, often on full disclosure, we have to acknowledge that you only have your own childhood. You don't have any other childhoods to compare it to. So you wouldn't know that was slightly out of the ordinary, or it was a bit different. A tight knit family, though, I sense, a very tight knit family. No sense yet of it being kind of you against the world, the Varadkars against the world, or anything like that.
No, definitely. Notwithstanding our biracial background. My parents were keen for us to fit in. The words like diversity weren't really used to refer to people anyway in those days. And I suppose it made sense in 1980s Ireland to raise us very much in the culture of the time.
In the culture of the country. So it wasn't. I mean, what were the signs of Hinduism in the family home?
Very few. Indian food definitely was a feature, but that's
a win.
Not necessarily Hindu. That definitely was a plus. And my mum did learn how to cook Indian food. She did the Madhur Jaffrey cookery courses. Yeah. So food was one thing. Cricket, which again is not a huge sport in Ireland, but has a following.
It's improved in the course of your lifetime, hasn't it? It's become a much bigger deal.
We've been in the World Cup and have done pretty well.
But your dad loved cricket.
Yeah, that's it's almost a religion. In the subcontinent, as you know. And then the third thing, the odd kind of Hindu religious festival would sort of creep in. So Diwali obviously would have been aware of as a kid, and then Gumpati, which is the Marathi word for the elephant god Ganesh. There's idols in the house as well as crosses.
So hedging your bets then, in a spiritual sense, as a family.
I still do actually. Ironically, on my mantelpiece at home, there's a cross, there's a menorah, there's a Gumpati, a Ganesh. There's also a Skeksis, and so you're safe. And
whatever happens,
lots of other things.
So the words might not have existed, or certainly they weren't in common parlance. But when did little Leo become conscious of being biracial, of being a little bit different from his classmates or his?
I think I always was.
Yeah.
And you can't not be if you're the only person of colour in a class of 30 kids.
Would people comment on it? Would kids be curious? Or
I don't know about kids, but you do get this sort of unconscious bias where people treat you a little bit differently, which I really didn't like, but I kind of...
But you'd spot it. You'd sense it.
Yeah. You get funny things like how often do you go back to India, or do you go back to India much? Like, I'm not from India, I don't go back there, and because it was so expensive to go there, I was 14 before I ever got to go there. So there's those kind of little things, or people would assume, other kids would assume that I would have a higher level of heat tolerance. But none of those things are racist by any means, because they're not malicious in intent, but they are a little bit othering.
And what did you like apart from cricket and curry? What were the sort of things that you thrived at school? Were you a good student at primary school? Did you read a lot?
Yeah, definitely kind of a swotty student of anything. Didn't really get into sports, but did like to study. I would have been ahead in the textbooks as to where we were in class, would have kind of read ahead, things like that. Wanted to do well in quizzes and exams and so on. And then also, my family on both sides would value education. Certainly on my mum's side, would have valued education. But then my dad, again, coming from an Indian Asian background, would always have encouraged us and pushed us to be top of the class,
and probably to follow him into medicine. Was that a kind of
a bit like I looking back now, I felt a bit of unconscious pressure to go into medicine. It was a family business. My dad and mum had built up a very successful practice with a lot of patients. They never pushed me into it. That's something I felt. I'm not sure it was ever true. But as it happened, both two sisters, one's a doctor, one's a midwife, and me as a doctor, and none of us inherited the practice. So
you took over the GP.
which, in a weird way, I feel a little bit bad about, because my folks invested into that for 20, 30 years.
Yes.
It's a family business as well
Yes,
as
of course.
a GP surgery, and weren't able to kind of pass it on or sell it on, really.
You were never tempted. Didn't want to go down that
No,
path.
like it did cross my mind. I trained as a GP, so
Yes.
it would have been an option. Not sure whether I would have been able to work with my dad day and night, though. That could have been tricky. Although he probably would have retired in that scenario. But as it happened, that never really arose, because I got elected to the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, while I was still finishing off my GP training. And perhaps if I hadn't been, I might have taken over the practice. But
So when did that fork in the road appear then? Because family legend has it that you were 7 when you announced that you wanted to be a future Minister for Health. So you knew what politics was,
Yeah.
and you were conscious of... It's an odd parallel to draw on this side of the sea, because we're not really holding our politicians in very high regard at the moment. But I've often thought that politics is, in a way, medicine for countries as opposed to individuals, and that the impulse can actually be quite similar.
yeah, our showbiz for ugly people.
Well, that's a less flattering analysis, isn't it, or analogy? So, I mean, it's a young age at which to be politically conscious, let alone politically ambitious.
And the book starts with that. It starts with me going down to the polling station to vote with my mum in what I think was the 1987 election, and being very excited by the whole process.
Why do you think that was?
I'm not sure. Like, why do kids get into anything?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, I can probably answer that, actually, Leo. I mean, you get into football because it's great fun, and the crowds are roaring, and you imagine it happening to you one day. Casting a vote in an election, I don't know that it is quite as easy to work out what's exciting about that.
No,
Did you have a sense of...
That's obvious, yeah.
Did you have a sense of importance, that this was perhaps your parents imbued you with an idea of your democratic rights being really powerful?
I definitely knew it was important, and that politics and democracy was a means by which you could change things.
Would this be dinner table conversation?
I think so. Like, we definitely talked about the news and politics at the dinner table, in a way that I'd say most households didn't.
Sure.
And then, because we'd eat late, because surgery would go on late,
Okay.
I'd then often watch the news with my parents, and would be allowed to stay up late sometimes to watch current affairs programs and so on. And I definitely liked talking to adults, like being able to have adult conversations.
What was Ireland like at the time? It's easy to overlook just how far and how fast the country has moved, and again, pretty much in the course of your lifetime.
Yeah, so quite a different place to what it is now. Much more homogenous. Up until the mid-90s, we had the Troubles in Northern Ireland, so we were always aware of the violence. Didn't really affect us in Dublin, but anytime you turned on the radio or the TV, you'd hear about a shooting or a bombing in Belfast. So the Troubles were there, and Northern Ireland, and what was happening there was always in the background. Economically also not a successful country, so people emigrated and never came back. It's not like emigration now, where as many Irish citizens who leave every year come back. It's a different type of thing than it was then. And I remember, kids in my class, families packing up and going to Canada, America, or Britain, and they'd never be seen again.
Gosh.
So economically, it was a very different place. And that all started to change really around the mid-1990s, where the economy took off, and we had the whole phenomenon of returning immigrants, people who were coming back from the UK and America and abroad and Australia, and also bringing with them, I think, different ideas and different social attitudes.
So where did political consciousness kick in? What were you thinking were the things that you could improve, or what were the things that you cared about in that kind of context?
Certainly when I went for election the first time as a councillor, it would have been...
How old were you then?
I was about 20 years old. Yeah,
it's incredible.
Bit mad, yeah. Didn't get elected. Learned more from the election I lost than all the ones subsequently which I won, and that's true in life. I think you learn more from your mistakes and your failures than you do from your successes. At the time, I in that election, I had a very local focus, because the area that I lived in was rapidly developing, huge numbers of new housing developments, but no real infrastructure. Schools and prefabs, poor public transport. As I said in that campaign, more golf courses than playgrounds, and was very keen to change that. But I was never really a localist. Definitely had that kind of wider view about what was happening in the world and how that might be changed.
And I mean, it's intriguing, isn't it, at such a young age to have a desire to get your hands on the levers of power and the levers of change. But I'd like to know a little bit more about what changes young Leo wanted to enact or see around him. Was it very localized? Was it just?
I'm trying to think about. I'm trying to think about what that was now. It's a great question. So what was, I think, there were different periods of my life, teenager, 20s, so there would have been different things and different causes at different times. One of the things we would have had during that period is a number of referendums around our relationship with Europe, because we had referendums on Maastricht and Lisbon and Amsterdam and Nice, and I was very much in favour of Ireland being at the heart of Europe, like the idea of a single currency, of a European citizenship, of being able to live, work, travel, do business freely from Athens to Reykjavik. So I like that idea. Like that idea, and still do.
Yeah.
So definitely that sense of things. Would have remembered the Iraq War happening.
Yes.
Probably would have been no, that was a bit later now. So I suppose it would depend at different.
Sure.
At different points and different times.
So, I mean, your politics was pragmatic then. You're not you're not a sort of young ideologue or a young idealist even. Your approach even then would have been, I think I'd be quite good at this, and I think I would be able to do good things.
I don't think it was managerial.
No.
Like, I usually sort of describe my politics being around three ideas essentially, and this hasn't changed very much. One is that Ireland should be at the heart of Europe, at the centre of the world, engaged in the UN with a good international development budget, all of those types of things, peacekeeping.
Well, let's pick them off. Hang on. Where do you think that came from? What is there in the early years that formed that? Because again, it's not an obvious intellectual destination to arrive at.
I think that would have had a lot to do with my upbringing. The fact that I had a dad from India, always knew that the world was a bigger place beyond Ireland. That both my parents had lived abroad and would often talk about their time in the UK and England, which was a very good one. And we also would have watched TV programs from all over the world. So that was definitely part of it. Never had this kind of idea that it would be a great thing if we could cut ourselves off. I've never had that thought or feeling.
It's a cometh the hour, cometh the man in a way, isn't it? Because your experience was quite zeitgeisty. Your family were not, your roots, on your mum's side, your Irish roots were very deep, but she'd moved overseas. The unit of your mum and your dad and you and your two sisters were very 21st century Ireland in a way, that sense of possibility and scale, the role that Ireland could play on a much bigger global stage. I wonder if you needed your kind of background to see it like that.
That I don't know, but I think I did kind of capture the zeitgeist, at least for a period of time, and that was largely accidental.
It always is, isn't it? I mean, right place, right time. Principle 2. So this sort of Ireland's role on the global stage and this absurd passion in some parts of politics for isolationism was the anathema to you. What's the second one?
So I think the second thing is what I suppose a lot of people would call a right-of-centre economic view. You should try and balance the books. You should try and support business before you distribute wealth, and you should distribute it. But before you distribute wealth, you actually have to create it. Just naturally thinking that ideas like free trade were a good idea. And that probably, again, links to background.
How conscious were you of the business side of your dad's practice?
Yeah, I was very aware that it was a business as well as a social service and a medical service.
Yes.
That everything had to be paid for, that the money had to come in. And then, my grandparents, my Irish grandparents, who I knew, my Indian grandparents died before I was born, they were farmers again. it's food production, but it's also a business. And my grandfather had had a haulage business and an oil distribution business. So I think that whole idea of self-employed, self-reliance, having to work to create wealth.
This is where the Irish son of Thatcher sobriquet
It
comes
probably
from.
did, yeah, which I don't think is accurate. I
nor do
understand
I.
where it comes from because
Yes.
of some remarks that I made along the way that maybe were a little bit heartless.
Like what?
I don't know.
No.
Well, yeah, I suppose one thing when I was Minister for Social Protection is much later on. I ran a campaign against welfare fraud,
Yeah.
and some people characterised that as being Thatcherite, as being Tory, that I was trying to crack down on poor people. As it happens, it's not poor people who commit welfare fraud because they're entitled to welfare. It's people who are trying to claim it when they're not entitled to it. And very often in Ireland, it's people who are what we call working and claiming. So they're working in the black economy, not paying their taxes, and also claiming welfare. So it's a double dodge in many ways.
So quite a lazy criticism then, really.
It is, but for people who wanted to make that criticism, yes. It was ammunition. And as it happened, I was able to recycle the savings into other social protection programs. And one of those, in fact, was extending the safety net to people who are self-employed. It was one thing I really found in the crash, and Ireland had a property bubble, a financial crash. I remember knocking on doors and talking to people, and very often the man in the house, if you like, or the main earner in the house was working in construction or was an architect,
yes.
Was linked to the property industry in some way. And the second link in the house, usually the woman might have been a nurse who was working part-time, a primary teacher, maybe a care worker, somebody who was bringing in less income, but they were entitled to nothing. Because they then got means tested against their wife's income, and that was very unfair. That's one of the things that I changed, was to give people who are self-employed a proper safety net in return for the contributions that they make.
And these are big things, even though they are, well, I suppose lots and lots of little things adding up to a big thing. Hard to, I mean, it's a hard political platform to sell. It's not sexy. It's not exciting. But it's the stuff that matters to you, because you did similar things in the pension arena as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I brought in, and the first payments will start in January, but a similar system to have here, auto enrollment, a universal pension system. We have a decent enough state.
But these are big things, Leo.
They are, yeah. And the other thing which is still underway, and the new government is slowing it down, but hopefully will finish the job, which is the living wage, which is to make sure that any working person, that we link our living wage to 60% of median earnings, so that anybody who works gets a decent bare minimum, and that it rises with wages and with salaries, and that was to be finished by 26. It looks now like it'll be finished by 29. But the way I would have sold that would have been around making work pay.
Yes.
That sort of language. One thing I would have used is the whole language around wanting to help people who get up early in the morning, which to me is people who work, who contribute. Of course, that was used against me. Some people said I was against night workers or shift workers, which wasn't the point at all, obviously. And then others said it was, a dog whistle that was sort of trying to, dump on people who couldn't work. But that was not it at all.
It's a minefield.
That's politics.
Yeah, and yet, we think of minimum wage or living wage legislation as leaning leftwards, and support for business and as leaning rightwards. You're not easily categorised then.
Probably not. But that whole left-right linear spectrum thing. For people who are interested in politics, and I know your listeners are, they wouldn't be listening to this. I think we all know that's ridiculously simplistic.
Yeah, increasingly.
It's probably
more than ever.
It's probably a 3D thing.
Yeah,
somebody needs to find this cube and try and put us into it.
So when you felt these stirrings, these political stirrings, there was never any doubt about which party you would join.
There was a bit. I did toy with joining a much smaller party. No longer exists.
Probably the right decision.
called the Progressive Democrats,
yes.
And they were also a centre-right party, but would have been more liberal on social issues.
That's
urban.
what we just touched on, isn't it?
Yeah, more urban. Also maybe a little more dynamic, and had some really impressive leaders. People like Mary Harney, who became our deputy prime minister, and would be somebody who I would have relied on for informal advice down the years. Went for the bigger party in the end.
At Trinity, I think you joined the
I actually
youth
joined.
wing. Did you join
I
before?
joined in Trinity. That's when I got involved for real.
Right.
But I technically would have been a paper member of my local branch in Blanchetown, the Dr. Mark Cooney branch, when I was 16. But I didn't really go to meetings and things.
So, if I'd met you in your, I mean, you did law for a couple of weeks at university before you switched to medicine. How did that happen?
I got an upgrade on rechecks.
Was it?
Yeah.
So you wanted to do medicine?
I did, but when I look back on my choices, our system is different to
Yes.
the system here. My nephew here in London is about to start in Durham soon, so I know how your system works with the matching and so on. Ours is very different. You essentially rank the courses you want to do, and I kind of had a mix of medicine and law courses, which doesn't make any sense at all to me now. But I think I was thinking I wanted to stay in Dublin and definitely wanted to go to Trinity College, which is where I went. But looking back now, I'm not sure how logical those course choices were. But like, do you really know at 18 what you want to do, or should you know at 18 what you want to do?
You wanted to be in politics.
Yeah,
at some point
yeah. So I was more certain about that than I was about which sort of real job I'd have.
Okay, I mean, if I'd met you then,
Although I never considered studying politics.
Did you not?
And I know people
no need
do.
To, really, is there?
It's political science is a very different thing to the practicalities of politics.
So if I'd met you in your first year at Trinity and said, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" You just said, "I'm going to be a politician."
There's a good chance if I trusted you and didn't think you might laugh at me,
Yeah,
I might
sure.
have I might have told you that, and certainly all my friends and peer group would have known that's
That was the plan.
where I was heading and wanted to do, and got very involved in politics in college and university.
What was the approach to your studies then? Because medicine's no cakewalk, is it? It's an incredibly hard work, and yet in the back of your mind, there must be part of you wondering if you were going to be doing it for very long. If the political ambitions were realised, the medicine would drop by the wayside quite quickly.
Well, kind of bad, really. I neglected my studies when I was in university. Would have always liked to have been and was close to top of the class in school, and obviously got the marks to get into medicine, but was not a great student. Would have missed a lot of lectures. The year I ran for election and didn't win, which was 1999, I think I failed all my exams.
Oh, really?
Thankfully, I was able to recover them.
You got 380 votes.
Was that bad?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many.
No, it was a local election, but
I don't know how much the winner got, so it's all relative, isn't it?
I came in sixth in what was a 4-seat
right, okay.
district, so
it could have been worse.
No, it was bad, but
I'm interested in this. I'm interested in the. So you weren't paying lip service to medicine because you did qualify.
Yes, yeah.
And yet you knew it wasn't what you wanted to do. You didn't want to be doing it 30, 40 years hence like your dad was.
But I also
was it a safety net?
I think a little bit, yeah. Like one thing my mum was very concerned about was that I would drop out of university and end up working in politics or go into politics full time. And she was keen, and I probably was keen too, to make sure that I had, I feel like, a real job and some real life experience. So maybe that sounds a bit calculating, but it's also kind of sensible too.
Yeah, it's also good son.
Yeah,
it's also good son behaviour, isn't it? Because they care for you, and they want
and then also as well, and I think it was an advantage when I was in elected politics. I never really had financial worries about losing my seat. Like, I know there are people who would genuinely worry that if they lost their seat, how would they pay the bills?
Gosh,
and
we forget that.
That's something I didn't particularly have to worry about,
because you had an ology, as they say.
Yeah,
you had something to fall back on.
And I know, I think in the UK it's not unusual for very wealthy people to be elected to Parliament. That isn't unusual in Ireland. It tends to just be regular people.
So you need the income, you need the wage, and the political side of things. While the academic side of things were, for the first time in your life, not flourishing, the political side of things flourished.
It's starting to take off. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really quite quickly. You're president of the youth of the European People's Party. You're hopping around Europe debating with other activists.
That was fun.
Must have been.
Got to see Europe, and largely at somebody else's expense.
And then in 2000, you're in the U.S. House of Representatives, I think, for the summer.
That was an internship. Yeah, the Washington Ireland program. That was a lot of fun.
So none of this is knocking the gloss off your view of politics. All of this is hardening your resolve.
I was liking it more and more. Being in the European Parliament, being in DC, yeah, definitely.
So you graduate 3 years later. I mean, the easy thing is lab coat by day, and then you're politicking by night.
Yeah.
And that was you. That was your.
Well, there was a period where I was trying to do both, and to be a doctor as well as being a local councillor and a candidate for Parliament, and that was extremely difficult. I felt I was doing a half-arse job of both, and I was letting down my colleagues, particularly my medical colleagues. So got to the point where I had to kind of go part-time and start to take leave of absence and so on.
And I don't want to skip over the period. I don't know how long you were there for, but you did another internship at your father's old hospital in Mumbai.
That was very short.
Was
a kind of a student placement. Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Oh, is that all?
But it was the first time I kind of got to know India properly, though.
Yes.
Because any time I'd been previously, it was a family holiday. I sort of lived on my own for a few weeks in Mumbai and got to know the place and got to see a lot of the good things.
I'm trying to think back, and obviously I grew up here, and I'm 7 years older than you. But were there moments where, as your sexuality became clear, which I mean, was from day one, really. Did you ever worry that would be an obstacle to political success in that era in that country?
No, I guess I did. Before you come out publicly, and I think these days you don't even have to come out, but in those days you did. You have to kind of come out to yourself, and that took me a long time. But I definitely was worried, probably needlessly so. Most of my worries were in my own head rather than anywhere else. But I would have been worried, that this could potentially be a negative. And bear in mind, I grew up in an Ireland in which homosexual relations were criminalised up until 1993. So I was doing the equivalent of my GCSEs around the time that ban was lifted.
Gosh.
So the chilling effect of that, I think, was still there 5-10 years later.
And when people have written a lot about this, and you cover it in the book, but modestly, I suppose. A biographer might have been less modest about the speed of your success and the speed with which you began to just win stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It wasn't. In some ways, it wasn't all that fast.
Was it not? It looks fast,
and then it just became fast.
Yes.
Yeah.
So by the 2004 elections, you're topping the national poll. Explain to British listeners what that means.
So it's it was our local elections that year, and we have all our local elections on the same day, once every 5 years, and that was the highest vote in the country. It was enough votes to get elected to Parliament, or not far off. So I think that kind of put me on the map.
Why do you think that was? And no modesty allowed. What were you doing differently from others, or what were you doing better?
Ran a great campaign for a start, which was a positive. This time I was running in the area I was from, and I think coming from a well-known family, my dad being the local GP was a big plus in that election when it came to opening doors. I was also the only candidate. We have a very different electoral system to the UK. We have a proportional system. So had there been two candidates from my party, that vote would have been lower. That's just a mathematical fact, because I would have had to split that vote. But I think really kind of showed that I had worked hard after I was co-opted to the council before I was elected, and then really ran a very different kind of modern campaign.
And then you're on the path to Parliament. But then you mean it now begins to feel almost inevitable, doesn't it, that you're going to be going down that path?
I think it was at that point, yeah. And a lot of things did kind of fall right for me at the right time. Planets aligning. So a lot of people get elected to the local council, but it takes a long time for them to then get elected to Parliament. Mine was only a 3-year gap, and that was partially because we had a very bad election 5 years previously and had almost been wiped out in the Dublin area, and the party had gaps and needed candidates, and here was this guy who did really well in the local elections and wants to do it, and I became the candidate.
So a lot of serendipity, including your name probably. It's quite memorable, isn't it? People are going to remember your name, both your Christian name and your surname.
That's right. And we use both. There were lots of posters just said Leo.
Yes, I'm sure. And Leo for Taoiseach starts getting chanted, but when you win your first, when you get in at the age of 28.
Generally speaking, bottom of the ballot paper as well, which can be a help.
Yes, of course it does.
Unless there's a Welsh running or something.
And so we mentioned sexuality, ethnicity. Ever something that you thought might hold you back? I mean, again, it's that serendipity and zeitgeist. Those are the two words that sort of, in some ways, sum up everything we've discussed so far. Is that the world was changing, and you were both a beneficiary and a symbol of that change. The world of Ireland was changing, and then the sort of serendipity of wanting it and being well placed to get it at that precise moment in time.
Yeah, I wasn't always that lucky, but
no, of course not. But it was probably the first time in Irish history when having a foreign name and having darker skin would not hold you back.
Well, we of course had De Valera.
Yes.
But that's a slightly different story.
Yes. So you knew that you were kind of nothing. There were no obstacles to the biggest jobs.
They were potential obstacles, but I never saw them as insurmountable. And also, I decided, the foreign name, the race issue would just be an incidental. I didn't try to kind of use it either.
No, that's interesting. That was a conscious decision. Because you talked when you first got elected of your dad travelling 5,000 miles, but that's a story, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's not an identity. And it's a story a lot of Irish people would, of course,
would understand,
recognise it, albeit that they'd travelled away from Ireland, or their family members had travelled away from Ireland.
But also, it was in the context of the fact that I was born and raised in Ireland, and my parents might have stayed in England, in which case I would have been born and raised here. They had talked about going to the United States. They tried India for a while. There are 4 countries in which I could have been born.
Yes.
And I was born in Ireland, and I think I won the lottery in that one because it's such a great country.
So 4 years after you get into Parliament, the crash occurs. This is hard, sticky politics now, and also then you are. Is embroiled the right word? It's one of those words that only ever appears in newspaper articles. But you're involved in the attempts to get rid of Enda Kenny. You side very much with Richard Bruton, and yet none of this stuck. You didn't garner a reputation for disloyalty. You didn't stay alienated from some of the politicians that you'd moved against.
No, and to be frank, it was disloyal.
Yes.
We had a party leader. We'd run bad opinion polls and overreacted to that. And I was one of a group of MPs who decided we should have a change of leader. And ultimately we were unsuccessful. And I was lucky again, I think, that he's decided that he would be more forgiving towards the newer, younger MPs who went against him than the ones that he had known for years, or perhaps would even have known that there was at the time Fine Gael families, people who whose dad or granddad had been an MP as well. That's kind of faded over time.
Were you in too much of a hurry at that point, do you think, or not?
Yeah, I was definitely in a hurry. Whether it was too much or not, I don't know, because opportunities arise when they do, not necessarily when they suit.
And he recognised your facility with media. You became now very much the...
Yeah, in any party, there's 10, 15, 20 spokespeople. The public will only ever be familiar with a small number of them. And I was determined that I should be one of them, that I'd be a household name. So I was out there in the media anytime I was given the opportunity. Would very rarely turn down the opportunity to go into studio or represent the party in a debate. And then was edgier perhaps than other people might have been, more strident in criticism. In part, everything I said I believed, but or almost everything. But definitely wanted to be noticed and to develop a reputation and develop a name.
You've said you were angry. I mean, it's a figure of speech, angry young man. You've applied it to yourself a couple of times in the past. What were you angry about?
Yeah, I got a lot less angry as the years went by, probably because I was in government and became responsible for the problems that the country had. But at the time we were in opposition. There'd been a financial crash. The economy was on the floor. People like me who still had jobs were in negative equity. Our property values had collapsed. Huge numbers of other people, many of whom I knew lost their jobs and couldn't pay their mortgages or had to emigrate at that time. And then the IMF arrived to take over our affairs.
Yeah.
So for the first time since independence, we were dependent on the kindness of strangers, as somebody else described it.
Yes.
And I was angry about that, I have to say. Angry that ever happened, and angry that the people who were at least in part responsible for it were still in government and wanted to get them out.
This offends your Irishness. It offends your patriotic pride.
Yeah, like it was, it was humiliating that it wasn't all our fault by any means.
No, of course.
There were major international factors at play here, but the country had borrowed too much, spent too much, and ultimately had to rely on the IMF, and the European Central Bank and the European Commission for a line of credit.
You are now
who then got to determine how the country was governed until we got rid of them
and that
in 2014.
And that sticks in the craw. I mean,
we need to make sure it never ever happens again.
So you become a household name. When did you? I mean, I know that you reputedly wrote it in a childhood diary, but were you always thinking that perhaps a top job could be yours one day? In quiet moments.
Yeah, like I definitely thought that I would get into politics, that I would get elected. I didn't necessarily know where it would end up. Would have hoped that it would be a cabinet position and maybe the top job at the end of the day. Also had thoughts about becoming an MEP. I liked the European aspect of politics, and that potentially might have been a different route, but that never opened up.
You still could.
I don't think so. Yeah, legally I could, yeah, but that's a whole other question.
And you are a politician who does stuff, aren't you? You're not a politician who sits waiting for opportunities or keeps his head below the parapet or stays out of it. One account describes you as having become gaffe prone when we're looking back in 2011 when you suggested there might be the need for another bailout, but also the things you attach yourselves to are big things. So you've mentioned the welfare thing. Welfare cheat us all. That was when you were Minister for Social Protection, and you took a lot of jip for that. But taxpayers probably felt that you were on their side. That it would,
I hope so, and I was. And
I know.
But I think there's kind of two sides to that coin. I was definitely willing to speak out,
yes,
to be outspoken,
and to be unpopular in a moment.
Yeah, and to be unpopular, and just to say things that people didn't necessarily want to hear, and that got me noticed. But then at the same time, there were times when I was shot my mouth off, quite frankly, and.
Are you embarrassed looking back, or do you see it?
Yeah. No, look. It's who I was at the time. The Rottweiler, as they described me.
They did.
Sometimes.
Did you revel in that?
Sometimes.
Did you like that?
I did like it. Yeah. Sometimes Rottweiler bites the wrong person.
Never bites himself, though.
No. So look, there's a few things that I wish I could take back, but I can't.
Okay. And then this serendipity zeitgeist thing kicks in again, because you publicly come out in a way that, as you've said, you probably wouldn't even need to do now. But it's practically weeks before the same-sex marriage referendum.
It was about 5 months, yeah, or 4 or 5 months. But that was a catalyst.
I appreciate that, but it also cut the other way. I think it probably had. I mean, a lot of people think that would have had influence upon the referendum, influence upon the vote.
I don't know if it did, to be honest. I'd like to think it did.
Well, it normalised the conversation is the phrase that I encountered when I was researching the interview.
Well, I think a key thing in a lot of those referendums, particularly referendums and plebiscites that happen around gay rights issues around the world, is do you know somebody who's gay? And if you know somebody who's gay, you're much more likely to vote for their rights. So this happened even going back to Harvey Milk in the US and Phyllis Schlafly. Some people have seen Miss America. They had ballot initiatives to ban gay teachers from classrooms, don't say gay laws, those types of things. Even back then, the research showed at the time that if you had a gay member of your family or you knew somebody who was gay, you were much more likely to vote against discrimination.
Sure.
So I think perhaps that there was a gay member of the cabinet, and he wasn't so strange or wasn't so other.
And he was part of the part of the political furniture.
So maybe that helped to kind of mainstream things a bit. I don't know.
It was weird because I was born in 1972 and I was given up for adoption because of the stranglehold. For a number of reasons, but because of the stranglehold that the Catholic Church had over Ireland, and it was still very much in place when you were a young man, when you were a boy. So watching from this side of the Irish Sea, the referenda on both equal marriage and later on abortion, if you told me in 1979 when I started school that was going to happen, I would not have. Would not have believed it.
Well, and you would have been right because the reverse happened in 1983.
Yes,
we copper fastened and strengthened our ban on abortion, and even though the Prime Minister at the time, Gareth Fitzgerald, wasn't in favour of it, the people decided to do it anyway.
And it's because of the church.
Yeah, and then in the 1980s, when that government, and it was government led by my party, tried to lift the ban on divorce, they lost the referendum and lost it badly. So the strength of Catholic social teaching was very, very strong throughout the 80s and doesn't really change until the mid-90s.
Why did it change so quickly and so much?
Yeah, I think three factors. The economic Celtic Tiger period meant people were way more affluent. That I think
so it
was
breaks
a factor.
the sway of the priest almost.
I think so. The other thing was people returning from having migrated to UK,
from a bigger
America, wherever,
world,
bring back different ideas, and we could almost trace that in some of the results. Island communities voting strangely liberally, but then when you actually found out half of them lived in New York, at some point you think differently. But the other thing, of course, was that people lost a lot of faith and confidence in the Catholic Church because of all the scandals. So you'd child abuse scandals, there are financial scandals, and even very devout Catholics and people who continued to go to Mass and still do were less willing to take instructions on how to vote from their priests.
And like that bloke in the Hemingway novel talking about bankruptcy, first slowly, then quickly. I mean, it crumbled so fast, didn't it, really?
Yeah.
And probably forever. Very, very different country from the one you grew up in so many ways.
Yeah, and of course, and like I'm not by any means anti-Catholic. I'm still a member of the church.
Same.
I'm not a regular mass goer. I go
Same.
occasionally, but one of the things that I tried to point out during the papal visit was that Ireland had changed and had come a long way. That we had a new relationship with the Catholic Church, the main church in the country, even to this day. But that we did appreciate the contribution that the church made, because so often in our history, the religious and the churches, including other churches, stepped in to a space where the state didn't really think it had any role. So, like when Ireland was created as a nation, as a state 100 years ago, there was no Department of Social Protection, there was no Department of Health. A lot of those things were seen to be carried out by religious bodies and not by the state at all.
It's an odd interview, this, in a way, for people who tune into Full Disclosure regularly. Some of my guests they may never have heard of. Some of them they would know like the back of their hand. We normally construct the interview in a way that it begins to end at the point at which the listeners know what happens next. But because most of my listeners are British, that isn't actually the case. They won't know much about what you did, for example, as Taoiseach, which you became in 2017 at the age of 38. And also we're here to encourage people to read Speaking My Mind by a politician, Leo Varadkar, who is clearly cut from a rather different cloth from, if not all politicians, then certainly the ones that we've been dealing with in the United Kingdom for a very long time. What was it like at that moment? You beat Simon Coveney to get the nod. I think, if not a foregone conclusion, then you were certainly the favourite, I think, weren't you?
Yeah.
Well, what did it feel like? I know it's a slightly crass question, but
it was great, yeah. It was really great. Like, of course, there's a little degree of fear there.
Yes.
And a little bit of imposter syndrome, but overwhelmingly it was a great feeling to have been chosen by my party to lead my party, knowing then within weeks I would become Taoiseach, become Prime Minister of the country, and had a really ambitious agenda as to what I wanted to do. Was very keen to hit the ground running, and then probably thought that an election would come quite quickly. because we were a minority government at the time, and I had envisaged within a year we'd have an election. I'd go to the country, I'd get my own mandate, and then have a solid 5 years to govern. And that didn't happen. Brexit actually intervened to disrupt that timeline.
You had a good Brexit from the perspective of Irish voters.
Yeah, but that went on for so long.
Tell me about it.
So certainly by the time we'd got to the point where Brexit actually happened, I'd already been Taoiseach for I think over 3 years at that stage, and certainly the novelty had worn off. The honeymoon was well over, and had an election result in 2020, which was very disappointing, which was not the one that we'd anticipated or the polls had predicted.
How frustrating was Brexit in the context of your programme? Had we not undertaken this ludicrous course of action in the United Kingdom, what would that presuming that you went to the country and you came back with a mandate, do you reflect upon how much more you could have done if Brexit hadn't taken up so much space and energy?
I do. And aside from the time it took up and the opportunity cost around that, it caused us to make some very conservative financial decisions. So we didn't...
Because you hadn't subscribed to the idea that everybody was going to suddenly get much richer.
No,
and the whole world was going to... Funny that, isn't it?
We were concerned that we were going to become poorer.
Yes, of course.
Which didn't happen. So we kept very tight budgets and didn't invest enough in infrastructure. I think had Brexit not happened, we would have had more confidence to carry out investments in housing infrastructure, transport infrastructure, water earlier, and things like the housing crisis, which we now suffer from in Ireland, wouldn't have been solved, but they mightn't have been as bad as they are now.
So
our thinking at the time was we had to run a pretty tight ship fiscally, because if Brexit went badly, we'd be in deficit very quickly, and the memory of the IMF was still very fresh.
Yes, of course it was. So, I mean, you're out in 2020, but you're back in 2022.
Not fully out. So
no, of course.
So we'd a coalition, and I became deputy prime minister. Yeah,
yes.
and then prime minister again.
And then you're back in the big job in 2022, just for two and a bit years, and then you decide.
Not sure it was even that. It was,
no, you're right.
Sorry, 1 a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's 2024 when you're on the way.
Yeah.
When you took the job for the second time, were you already thinking, this is the home straight? Or was it that year that made you think, I'm not going to do this for much longer?
Around 2020 or 2021 or so, when I was Deputy Prime Minister, I did consider the possibility that I wouldn't go back in as Taoiseach for a second time, that I'd hand over to somebody else.
What was that like? Because this is...
By the time it came up to the reality, I was determined to do it, and there was no doubts in my mind at that point.
Okay.
But there certainly was a period.
But this doesn't fit with anything that's gone before, because you've been living and breathing politics, arguably since you were 7 years old. You've achieved the ultimate ambition. You've been frustrated by things beyond your control, not able to do some of the stuff that you might wanted to have done. If this was a plot for a novel, there's no earthly way you would now be thinking of knocking it all on the head.
Yeah, and going into my second term as Taoiseach, I wasn't, but during the period in between, I was, and perhaps some of that was...
Must have stayed.
So, some of it was, I think, an effect of the 2020 election, one that went very badly.
Yeah.
That must have hit my confidence to some extent, even though I didn't admit it to myself at the time. It must have done.
Yes.
But certainly by the time I was heading back into office, like one of the things your readers will read about if they get a chance to read the book is there was a period when I was under a police investigation, a guard investigation. That was a very unpleasant time. But by the time I was going back in for a second term, that was all out of the way.
Yeah.
And the coast was clear, and I was really determined to do a good job, to learn from some of the mistakes from my first term, lead the party into another election and do better in that election. But it didn't work out that way.
And there's no petulance here. Because you mentioned the police investigation, you mentioned the 2020 election result. And you haven't had a golden career. It wasn't without problems and obstacles and some, unpleasant labelling when it comes to some of the stuff that you've done. There's no petulance here. It's not that you're thinking, oh well, sod you then. If you're going to treat me like this, I'm not going to stick around and be
No.
your whipping boy anymore.
No, that
But something has
Yeah.
shifted, and I can't quite pin down what it is. It's because your sense of duty hasn't been diluted.
No.
Your sense of
I think a bit of it was kind of life moving on.
what was it?
Yeah, like 13 years in government is a long time.
Yeah,
Around the cabinet table, you only get one life.
yeah,
And certain, at this stage, I'd a life partner in Matthew Barrett, and
Sure.
The job was everything. Didn't have enough time to kind of live in many ways. So, the extent to which I was willing to allow politics to colonize my entire life became less. And then there was also political reality. My political capital was depleted.
right.
I was finding it harder to get things done, get things over the line. New initiatives just weren't getting the bounce that I thought they would. And then I had to make a call. We were heading into an electoral cycle, and was I going to be around for that or not? Because once I'd committed to that electoral cycle, I would have been committing to 2029.
Yeah, okay.
Which would mean I would still be there. I don't know whether I'd be Deputy Prime Minister or lead the opposition or just a backbencher, but I'd still be there.
And you just didn't fancy that?
I didn't want to do it, no.
No, I've not think I've ever interviewed a politician quite like you before, because
There's a few of us around.
are there though?
Yeah, well, I think Jacinda Ardern, the former New Zealand Prime Minister.
Yes.
I think
well, I've not
she's
interviewed her. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we're a similar character when it comes to some of these
That's
things.
interesting. It's healthy. I mean,
think so, yeah.
It's a good
Yeah.
thing. But what's interesting about you is that you were one of those addicts, one of those political.
There was I discovered when I was in Tennessee this summer, President Polk, that's a very long time ago, who got elected promising he'd serve only one term.
Oh,
And he kept his promise.
God.
so
so it's not
they
unique,
must
and
exist.
and it's not new. But I guess it's surprising. It's another reason for people to read the book, that you could. I mean, it speaks of being a very well-adjusted person, that you can weigh up your own life in such an objective fashion and make decisions that that break the chain of what's gone before. I mean, okay, politics is not what I want to be doing anymore, and without having a very
Yeah.
strong idea of what you wanted to do instead.
It wasn't easy either.
No, of course.
It was a bit like cutting your own umbilical cord.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes.
Yeah, or people say, politics is a bit like a drug. It's like deciding, look, I'm going cold turkey here.
Yeah.
But
I can tell from your face you've got no regrets.
No.
There's a
no, I
lightness.
thought I would. I was
Yeah.
I was very prepared. I sort of prepared myself psychologically for 20% or 30% regret.
Sure.
I said to myself, when I see my successor making announcements about things that I did all the work for,
Yeah.
or most of the work for, that I'll be annoyed or disappointed, but I wasn't at all. And it's been nice to observe politics again. Like one thing, because politics is so busy, you become really reliant on briefings prepared for you by other people, by your advisors, by your officials. Like, it's nice now to actually become informed again and sort of read newspapers and magazines for myself. Even when the current Prime Minister took up office, that's Micheál Martin,
Yes.
I watched that all happen at home on the couch in
Amazing.
front of my TV in my house. I'd never done that before because I'd always been there.
From such a young age.
Yeah, and then I was in college, so it's been kind of interesting to be able to watch and observe politics from the outside, and I'm not fully gone from it.
No, of course.
Even though I don't hold elected office anymore, I'm still a member of my party, still involved in campaigns, still involved in different issues. So I sort of have the a la carte option now, which is.
And you're still a very
kinda lucky,
still a young man. You're still only in your mid-40s, so the world is your oyster, isn't it? They also say that all political careers end in failure. Do you think you're an exception to that rule?
I don't think it ended in failure, so maybe I'm one of the exceptions.
And you went on your own terms.
Like there are other people who,
Sure.
who've
Yeah, but I didn't just invent the
Yeah,
figure
yeah,
of speech.
yeah,
It's
true,
a-
true. It is there. But isn't there a second part of that, though? And it's what matters is what you achieve along the way.
Yeah.
So actually ending in failure, whether it's an election defeat, doesn't matter so much if during the time you held office, during the time you held conch, that you actually managed to get some good things done. You could potentially last a lot longer in politics by playing it safe all the time and achieve a lot less.
Leo Varadkar, thank you. Speaking My Mind
Thank you.
is out now, and as you've gathered from the course of this interview, it's the memoir of a very interesting and quite different politician. Thank you.